Hi, my name is Stu Bailey. I'm the Chief Enterprise AI Architect at ModelOps. If you don't know what an Enterprise AI Architect is, stay tuned. I'm going to cover that, some other roles, but primarily focus on what is ModelOps, this key capability for scaling and governing enterprise AI initiatives across the organization and ensuring that the maximum value is obtained from such enterprise AI initiatives. I'll also talk about the requirements for systems that should be put in place to support this ModelOps capability. And I'll be drawing examples from our customer base, those who use ModelOps Center, the production enterprise system for ModelOps that we provide at here at ModelOps. So to start with, I want to say that in 20 minutes, I'm not going to be able to cover all of the challenges and all of the detail around ModelOps as a capability, but there is a lot out there that you can read about. There are a lot of different organizations talking about ModelOps that have implemented ModelOps, that have analyzed what ModelOps should be for the large enterprise. A good example is Gartner, and I brought a quote here from them. Quote, ModelOps lies at the center of any organization's enterprise AI strategy. And that comes from a paper they published just this past August, Innovation Insights for ModelOps. That and many other research publications from Gartner and Forrester, as well as a growing community around ModelOps, is at your disposal for finding out more. So really in this keynote, I just want to highlight what are the kind of foundational principles to get you on your journey for ModelOps. A primary question around ModelOps is why ModelOps now? What is the value, what is the pain that drives large organizations to start seriously investing in a ModelOps capability? I've listed some of those here on the right of this slide, and I think they're generally in our experience of this order. You know, risk, as more and more enterprise initiatives are really driving central decisioning with algorithmically derived models, AI and ML models, it's really impacting existing risk and governance structures. So how to ensure that there is a smooth transition of the newer modeling techniques into the existing structures really drives large organizations to a ModelOps capability kind of first and foremost. But there's also just getting those models into business faster. So much time and energy is spent developing these models, and sometimes they have, very notoriously unpredictable shelf life or applicability to a particular business regime. Just getting them into business faster is often a driver for a core ModelOps capability. And from there, things like increased transparency and accountability, being able to know where your models are, and of course, all of that leads to being able to unlock the value of these enterprise AI initiatives, not only now, but over time as the number of those initiatives are inevitably going to increase. And we've seen a tremendous increase of those even over the last 18 months. And again, I'd direct you to Gartner and others for quite a lot of information about what drives organizations to ModelOps and what the requirements are. I really, in this keynote, want to focus on kind of the two pillars of ModelOps in terms of understanding both the reason for ModelOps as a need, as well as some of the challenges that ModelOps as a capability has to address over time. So the first one is really this. AI and ML models are challenging enterprise AI assets to manage and operate. So when we talk about enterprise assets, on the left of this slide, you see in the kind of gray hexagons, representations of the typical enterprise-wide assets. Things like enterprise-wide tooling, enterprise-wide hardware and machines, enterprise facilities, enterprise-wide software and software processes, and a certain class in the lower right of those gray hexes, a certain class of model, specifically traditional models that impact regulatory or other enterprise-wide governance structures. In financial services, these are often models that are registered in a model risk management system or an MRM. So traditionally, and traditional models, statistical models, models derived from business and domain expertise tend to be more in the business unit context, not the enterprise context. Really focused on driving the P&L or the performance of a specific business unit. What's different about AI and ML models are these are decisioning models like traditional models, but they really are from the get-go there's demand for them to be, or requirement, I should say, for them to be enterprise assets. Why? Well, for one thing, they're incredibly unique. I mean, each one of these is, you know, a piece of intellectual property owned by the entire enterprise that is derived from proprietary data, generally proprietary matching of a business problem to a particular algorithmic approach for learning these models in the machine learning or AI context. So they're really very, very proprietary on an individual basis. And they're very complex in terms of their relationship to business processes, approvals, governance structures, you know, because they fit right into a decisioning framework, but also technically they tend to hit the enterprise-wide technical structure because of their technical complexity. Maybe they have to go through a DevOps process. Maybe they have to go through a security process that's enterprise-wide. Maybe they have to be plumbed into various parts of the enterprise IT systems. Some models may need to be in the cloud for proximity to a consuming application. Some models may need to be on-prem because of a PII situation. So the relationship of each of these unique models to these enterprise structures in the AI and ML world, you know, is kind of drives them to be enterprise assets more than their cousins, kind of traditional models, and you know, serving the BU, and they're more complex and more rapid life cycles, kind of in very unpredictable shelf life. So you may be refreshing these models very quickly. They have a different frequency of refresh, and there's just a different order of magnitude in terms of the number of these models that is typically found in a managed risk MRM system, a model risk management system in the traditional sense. So this all kind of leads to enterprise AI and ML models being uniquely challenging to manage. And if you can internalize that these are a new class of enterprise-wide asset that will really provide a foundation for you to go forward on the kind of the why and hows of ModelOps as a capability. The second pillar is that all of these models have their own life cycles. They really have their own relationship in time to various existing business processes and various existing enterprise-wide technical processes, as well as accountability to the business units in which they're enriching in terms of decision-making. And so you can think of these assets now as having a life cycle that may be on the scale of not only weeks, but months, even years, which, again, not dissimilar to traditional models, but the pace at which things change in a life cycle may be, you know, much faster or at least much less predictable than you'd have in more traditional models, even the enterprise kind of governed traditional models. So this slide kind of gives you a rough idea of a life cycle. On the left, in the purple, is the model factories. That's all the stuff that happens from a data science perspective for models to be created. Models are not traditional software. They don't have the same relationship to enterprise patterns because of their uniqueness, but the model life cycles certainly lend themselves to enterprise-wide patterns, which you're seeing here in this type of example. Oftentimes, the packaging, deployment, and execution is provided by the model factories themselves, where they kind of say, oh, we can also wrap this into a Docker container and publish it. Or a ModelOps platform can provide that capability. So there's, on a per model basis, exactly the details of packaging, deployment, and execution part of the life cycle can be done in many different places. But ModelOps is about really understanding the overall life cycle and its integration, both business and technical, as the model provides value over time in the enterprise. And in the green part of this slide, you can see and the typical operational cycle, which is provide scores and inferences, monitor the concept drift, monitor things like statistical performance or data drift. So the ongoing monitoring of models, as well as kind of the governance structure in the lower right, regulatory and compliance audits. If there are any changes to the model, like for example in retraining or champion challenger, which might be very complicated automated retraining processes, then that may kick off a new regulatory or compliance or accountability process. So the green becomes a long-term operational life cycle that can have tremendous complexity, but has to kind of by definition be automated. And you can imagine now, as the enterprise has hundreds or thousands of models, being able to know exactly where each model is in its own life cycle becomes a challenge for scale. And if it's not done well, impacts the ability to govern and provide accountability and auditability, things like ethical fairness and bias, for example, on a per model basis. So models are assets. They're complex assets that aren't like other, they're similar, but not like any other asset that has come before in the large enterprise. And models need life cycles. And those life cycles are also complex, must be automated to scale, and have complex relationships with existing business and technical processes. So if all you get from this keynote are those two kind of foundational concepts and you internalize them, I think you'll understand as you learn more about model ops, kind of the where and why and how model ops actually works and unfolds beyond that. Now, it's important to note that, again, as I mentioned, while models tend to not lend themselves to patterns across the enterprise because of their kind of uniqueness. They're not like software in that way. They don't commoditize like software. They don't, you may have a lot of small data models. You might have a lot of large data models. Model life cycles do, like any enterprise architectural consideration, tend to lend themselves to enterprise-wide patterns. We do see the life cycles being an enterprise-wide concern, and this sets up the role, as I mentioned, of enterprise AI architect. So I have some example life cycles here. We talked a little bit in depth about our example fraud detection life cycle. You can see some other use cases here, like anti-money laundering, specifically drawing from financial services. But all of these life cycles need to be managed and designed, and they really are architectural assets. So in the same way that models are assets, life cycles become assets too at the enterprise level. So that leads us to systems that deliver model ops capabilities really have to do two things very well. They have to manage the AI ML models as enterprise assets, and they have to be able to govern, automate, and monitor continuously those assets through their life cycles. And that's exactly what our model production, model ops system does, Model Ops Center, very focused on the very large enterprise, the ability to manage, govern, and monitor models no matter where they came from, and no matter what type of business they're supporting, but be able to provide that enterprise-wide automation and governance and ensure that all the questions at the enterprise level can be easily answered with respect to every enterprise AI initiative, as enterprise AI is becoming kind of the strategic direction for most decisionings in large organizations increasingly. So this is why I think Gartner and others talk about model ops as a kind of foundational capability for the current and future state of enterprise AI going forward. And so I direct you to Model Ops Center as an example of a system that supports those fundamental challenges in managing AI and ML models, as well as being able to automate at scale very complex life cycles that are inclusive of business and technical challenges, and provide the organization a capability to say, I know where all my models are. I know whether, if they're producing scores for any particular application, by definition, they should have gone through all the approvals that are required and necessary, and that's auditable and discoverable, and it holds all the appropriate parties responsible. at a time scale that is well beyond, say, software development or model development, because some of these life cycles may be in automation for even years. So we have to be able to understand that at a kind of enterprise-wide time scale, not a business unit time scale, and be able to provide the right tools for a ModelOps capability in terms organizationally to kind of grow up around that. So I won't spend a lot of time on ModelOps Center, but ModelOps Center is just representative of a type of ModelOps system for a large enterprise. You know, modern microservices architecture that can run in any virtual cloud or on-prem. It's not, it's very agnostic to where it runs itself. Integrations with all the leading model factories, SageMaker, Dataiku, RStudio, Jupyter, you know, the list goes on and on. That should be an important requirement for any ModelOps software, that it is up to date with integrations with all the leading model factories. Any model may be drawing from any different type of data asset in the large enterprise. So having integrations with all the leading data platforms that the enterprise is already invested in, as well as there are often some small data models that use very specialized or proprietary data that should be easily integratable, right? Obviously integrate with all the vast complexity and all, existing investments in IT shared services, and most importantly, ensure that as production data comes into these models to produce production scores and inferences, those are being consumed appropriately, whether RESTful interfaces or on batch style or streaming into the applications that need those production scores and inferences to actually make real decisions in real time. But again, if you read the research from Gartner and Forrester, I think you'll get a sense of the kind of requirements for any system for a large enterprise, ModelOps Center being kind of representative of that. A common question is, but how does this impact the organization? Who actually uses ModelOps Center? Who really delivers the ModelOps capability to the enterprise? So we've been doing this for over 5 years now. You know, there's really no question about this for us. We've seen how ModelOps, and specifically our ModelOps Center, impacts large organizations. And it generally works like this. On the obviously in the middle is ModelOps Center and the ModelOps capability, the ability to manage, govern, and monitor all models, no matter where they came from. On the bottom and on the top are the darker tabs that are report into usually a central IT function. Why? Because the ModelOps is an operational capability. It really has to run every day, 24/7 for years. And it's generally the central IT organization that has that experience, running operational capabilities where they can be very complex, but they have to work 24/7 forever. And so data ops, DevOps, IT ops, you know, are also core centralized technology capabilities that often specific models have to have a relationship with in their life cycle. So a particular model going through a particular life cycle may need to draw from data platforms that data ops is managing, may have to go through a CI/CD pipeline that DevOps understands well, has to have the kind of right compliance or other maybe security issues that IT ops and SecOps have to get through. And so those are kind of central relationships. But unlike traditional software, there's a different relationship with enterprise functions like compliance. And of course, these models are really delivering value to specific lines of business and specific business units. So the line of business owner on the left and the data scientists, who almost always are embedded, you know, for a specific model or class of models, embedded in a business unit with the model factory of choice, their model development life, you know, kind of process of choice. Those are business unit functions. And so ModelOps kind of emerges with two primary roles, the enterprise AI architect and the ModelOps teams, which report to the CIO because they have this ongoing continuous operational requirement, but they are kind of have a different relationship with things like compliance and the business problems involved and the data scientists, because they have to understand exactly what is this model doing with respect to developing the right life cycle. So let me just dive into these two roles a little deeper. Unlike you know, many architectural roles in a large enterprise, what's kind of refreshing about the enterprise AI architect if a system like ModelOps Center is used, is a very concrete task-driven role. The enterprise AI architect's job is to design lifecycle automations rigorously to be automated by a ModelOps system like ModelOps Center. So an enterprise AI architect really has to have the relationships across all of the enterprise-wide kind of technical assets, but also get deep into the various BUs business structure to understand which part of the business aspects of the lifecycle need to integrate with what systems and how to automate that, and encode that in a lifecycle that can be automated for a very long time with something like ModelOps Center. And now you can imagine thousands or tens of thousands of these models running through maybe hundreds or thousands of life cycles on a daily basis. And so at least a reasonably, maybe a small team, 2 or 3 people, need to have an operational console, not unlike IT ops or SecOps, where they can really know where's every model in their life cycle today. Is it green, yellow or red in terms of delivering scores and inferences to critical business applications or processes, and how exactly to triage that if something comes up, and be able to answer questions, include accountability, be able to support full-blown audits and regulatory compliance within the framework of every model and every model in its life cycle. And so model operators are operational personnel that use a system like ModelOps Center every single day to understand where models are. The other roles like DevOps or DayOps may interact with ModelOps Center. Data scientists obviously will interact with ModelOps Center when they need to register any production-ready models into a ModelOps capability. But it's really the model operators and the enterprise AI architects that drive the requirements for ModelOps systems like ModelOps Center and use it on a daily basis. And this is why ModelOps becomes so foundational, can be answered at the enterprise level and drive further investments or de-investments in enterprise AI initiatives. And being able to ask questions about whether the models are approved for that use, whether they've passed regulatory compliance. And if something were to happen, be able to provide a full audit trail, be able to know exactly how a model got to where it is. What we've seen is failed audits lead to an investment in ModelOps as a capability and something like ModelOps Center. After the, these have been more mature capabilities within a large enterprise, then it becomes a key performance indicator, KPI of ModelOps that no audit should ever fail, because if the enterprise AI architect is doing their job correctly, the life cycles that are automated will encode all the necessary steps to ensure that models pass any audits, and that that all of that is recordable, so that by the time you get to delivering a regulatory report or whatever, you know for a fact that those models have passed, because they could never have been deployed and gotten through that part of the life cycle if they hadn't. And if they're getting hung up somewhere, you know exactly where they're getting hung up. Those are kind of the foundational pieces of ModelOps to be able to manage AI and ML models as enterprise assets, and be able to design complex business and technical model life cycles that can be fully automated at scale. And if you can do those things, then your organization is well on its journey for increasing its investment in enterprise AI over time. So again, if you think of ModelOps as a foundational capability, it can really drive a lot of excellence down the road, as well as ensure that your current investments are all the value is getting delivered even today. So it's not something you want to put off if you don't have a ModelOps capability. And if you do have a ModelOps capability that maybe you built yourself, you might look at the community building up around ModelOps as a general capability, and systems like ModelOps Center that you can acquire that allow you to accelerate your competence in that area. Thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great day.